The wind cuts through downtown like a blade tonight, and Grace Whitfield is down to her last layer. She's sitting on a subway grate outside the 8th Street station, warm air hissing up from below, the only heat she'll get until sunrise. Her coat is thin, patched at both elbows with mismatched fabric, a safety pin holding the zipper together where the teeth gave out weeks ago. It's the only thing standing between her and 22 degrees. Across the grate, an old man folds himself against the brick wall of a shuttered bakery, arms wrapped around his knees, whole body shaking. Grace watches his lips turn a color they shouldn't be. "Sir," she calls out, voice raw from the cold. "Sir, are you okay?" He doesn't answer. Just shivers harder, teeth chattering loud enough to hear over the wind. Grace doesn't think. She just moves. She stands, unzips her coat with fingers already numb, and crosses the sidewalk in 4 quick steps. "Here," she says, draping it over his shoulders before he can protest. "Here, take this." "I can't," the old man starts, voice cracking. "I can't take your coat, miss, you'll freeze." "You need it more than I do tonight," Grace says, already tucking the collar up around his neck like he's someone she loves. "Please. Let me do this." Across the street, a black Escalade idles at the curb outside a private club, engine humming low. Victor Kane sits in the back seat, phone in hand, mid-sentence with his lawyer about a deal that closed an hour ago and made him $11 million richer. He stops talking. His eyes catch the scene through the rain-streaked window. A woman with nothing giving away the only thing keeping her alive. "I'll call you back," he says and hangs up before his lawyer can respond. He watches Grace kneel in front of the old man, rubbing his hands between hers, murmuring something Victor can't hear through the glass. Something in his chest, something that's been locked down tight for longer than he can remember, shifts. Victor Kane has built an empire on the belief that nobody gives anything away for free. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. But the woman across the street just handed a stranger her only protection from the cold, and got nothing back but his trembling gratitude. "Boss?" his driver asks. "Are we heading to the penthouse?" "Not yet." Victor's eyes stay locked on Grace as she stands, coatless now, arms wrapping tight around herself against the wind. "Give me a minute." He steps out of the car into the cold himself, coat still buttoned, and watches from across the street as Grace checks on the old man one final time, tucking a granola bar from her pocket into his hand, pressing it there like it's something precious, before she turns and walks away. Coatless. Shivering. Alone. She moves fast, head down, arms crossed tight against her body, disappearing around the corner of 9th and Lincoln. Victor follows. Not close enough to spook her. Just close enough to keep her in sight, boots hitting wet pavement in careful, measured strides. She walks 3 blocks, past a boarded-up hardware store, past a church with its lights already off for the night. Then she stops. She glances over her shoulder once. A habit, Victor realizes, not suspicion, just the practiced caution of someone who's learned the streets aren't always safe after dark. She slips through a gap in a chain-link fence, one that's been cut and bent back just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Victor stops at the fence, breath fogging in the cold, and watches her disappear into the shadowed mouth of an abandoned parking garage. What he sees when he follows her inside is going to change everything he thought he understood about the woman who just gave away her only coat. Because what's waiting in that garage isn't just Grace Whitfield. It's an entire hidden world he never knew existed 3 blocks from his own downtown offices. And Grace Whitfield is the reason any of it is still standing. Victor squeezes through the gap in the fence, dress shoes scraping against cracked concrete. The parking garage swallows sound the second he's inside. 5 levels of shadow, most of the overhead lights long dead, the air thick with the smell of motor oil gone stale and something colder underneath it. He hears voices before he sees anything. "Oh, careful." A child's laugh, quickly hushed. "Miss Grace. You're back." Victor edges around a concrete pillar and freezes. The ground level of the garage has been transformed, not into chaos but into something startlingly organized. Cardboard partitions. Salvaged blankets hung as makeshift curtains. A cluster of a dozen people, mostly women, a few children, huddled around a small propane heater burning low and careful. "I brought crackers," Grace says, crouching in front of a little girl who can't be older than 6, pulling a crumpled sleeve of saltines from her back pocket. "Not much tonight, baby, but something." The girl takes them like they're gold, immediately breaking one in half to share with a smaller boy beside her. Victor's chest tightens at the sight. Two children sharing crackers like it's the most natural thing in the world. "Where's your coat, Grace?" an older woman asks, voice sharp with concern, already reaching for a threadbare blanket to wrap around Grace's shoulders. "You're shaking." "Gave it to a man on 8th Street, Grace says simply, like it costs her nothing to admit. "He needed it worse than me tonight." "You keep doing that," the older woman mutters. "You're gonna freeze to death being kind to strangers." "Better than freezing being kind to nobody," Grace says, and there's the faintest smile in it, tired but real. Victor stays hidden behind the pillar, watching a woman with nothing organized care for people who have even less. He counts them quietly. 11 adults. 4 children. All of them clustered around Grace like she's the center of gravity holding this fragile world together. "Any word on the blue tarps I asked about?" Grace asks the older woman. "Level 2's been leaking since Tuesday. Marcus said he might find some behind the hardware store dumpster tomorrow." "Good." Della's cough is getting worse. She can't keep sleeping in the wet. Victor's stomach turns. She's not just surviving here. She's running triage on a crisis nobody in his world even acknowledges exists. A small boy tugs at Grace's sleeve. "Miss Grace, is Mr. Aldo gonna be okay? The one from the bakery corner." Grace kneels to his level, voice gentle. "I think so, sweetheart. Somebody made sure he had a warm coat tonight." "Was it you?" "It was somebody who cared," Grace says, deflecting with practiced ease, the kind of humility that doesn't perform itself for an audience. Victor's jaw tightens. A vein pulses faintly at his temple. He spent 15 years building an empire where loyalty is bought, respect is enforced, and kindness is a weakness men exploit the second they sense it. He's never once seen kindness look like this. Deliberate, exhausted, given freely anyway. His phone buzzes in his pocket. He silences it without looking. A young woman approaches Grace, voice low, urgent. "Grace, the notice is back. Taped to the fence post again. 3rd time this month." Grace's whole posture shifts, shoulders tightening, jaw setting hard. "Let me see it." The woman hands over a laminated flyer. Victor can just make out the header from where he's standing. "Notice of intended demolition." Grace's hands tremble slightly as she reads it, breath catching. "They can't just," she starts, then stops herself, glancing at the children nearby, lowering her voice. "They can't just tear this down. Where would everyone go?" "Same place we'd have gone before," the young woman says bitterly. "Nowhere." Victor's eyes narrow at the flyer in Grace's hands. He recognizes the logo stamped in the corner, Halloran Development Group. A name he's crossed paths with before in boardrooms. A name attached to a man whose reputation for ruthlessness rivals Victor's own. He doesn't yet know how deep that connection runs. He doesn't yet know that the demolition notice in Grace's shaking hands is the opening move in something far more calculated than a simple property clearance. Victor steps back from the pillar, quiet as he came, mind racing. He came here tonight following a woman who gave away her only coat. He's leaving with a question that's going to keep him awake long past sunrise. Who is Grace Whitfield, and how did a woman capable of holding an entire hidden community together end up with nothing but a garage floor to call home? Victor doesn't go home that night. He sits in his car outside the garage for 2 more hours, engine off, watching the faint orange glow of the propane heater flicker through gaps in the fence. At 2 a.m. he finally calls his head of security, voice low, controlled. "I need everything on a woman named Grace Whitfield. Former nurse, I think. Homeless now, downtown area." "That's a common name, boss. Gonna need more." "Find her," Victor says. "Tonight if you can." By morning, a thin folder sits on his desk. Grace Whitfield. 31 years old. Registered nurse, licensed since 24. Employed at St. Agnes Memorial for 6 years. Commendations for patient care listed in her file. A photo of her in scrubs, smiling, unrecognizable from the exhausted woman he watched hand away her coat. Then 18 months ago the file goes quiet. License lapsed. Employment terminated. Home address changes twice, then disappears from the system entirely. Victor flips to the next page and stops cold. A hospital billing record. St. Agnes Memorial. A patient named Thomas Reyes, no relation on file, admission date 18 months and 3 weeks ago. Emergency surgery. No insurance. Total balance. $94,000. And beneath it, a payment record, the balance paid in full 6 weeks later by Grace Whitfield personally. Victor's jaw tightens. His mind runs the math before he even reaches for his phone. $94,000 is not the kind of money a nurse pays off a stranger's bill with pocket change. Get me her financial records, Victor tells his assistant. Everything. I want to understand what happened here. What comes back an hour later makes his stomach drop. Grace liquidated her retirement account. Sold her car. Took a second mortgage on a modest house in the suburbs. A house that, 3 months later, went into foreclosure when she couldn't keep up the payments alone. She gave away everything she had to save a stranger's life, and it cost her every safety net she'd built for her own. Victor sits back in his chair, the folder open in front of him, something heavy settling in his chest. He thinks of her kneeling in front of an old man on 8th Street, coat draped over his shoulders like it cost her nothing. He thinks of the crackers pulled from her back pocket, split evenly among children who weren't hers. This isn't new behavior. This is who she is. It's been who she is the entire time. His phone rings. Marcus, his head of security again, voice tight. Boss, you're gonna want to see this too. That demolition notice on the garage property. I pulled the filing. And Halloran Development Group filed for the permit 2 weeks ago. But the land itself. It was quietly purchased 8 months back through 3 shell companies. Guess whose name is buried at the bottom of that chain? Victor's blood runs cold before Marcus even says it. Say it. Desmond Halloran. Same guy you almost partnered with on the Riverside project last year. Guy backed out at the last minute, remember? Said the numbers didn't work. Victor remembers. He remembers Desmond Halloran's easy smile across a boardroom table, the practiced charm that made men trust him right up until the moment it cost them everything. Why would he want that specific lot? Victor asks. It's a condemned parking garage. There's nothing valuable there. That's the thing, boss. There is now. Marcus's voice tightens further. City Council just approved a new transit hub 2 blocks over. That garage sits directly on the access route. Once it's demolished and rezoned, that land's worth triple what he paid for it. Victor's hand curls slowly into a fist on the desk. So he's clearing it. Fast. Quietly. Before anyone realizes what's actually happening there. Looks that way. Victor thinks of the notice trembling in Grace's hands the night before. The 3rd time this month, the young woman said. This isn't just corporate greed clearing an empty lot. This is a calculated plan to erase an entire community of homeless women and children before anyone with power or a platform notices they exist. When's the demolition scheduled? Marcus hesitates. 11 days, boss. And there's one more thing. What? Halloran's already hired private security to start discouraging trespassers starting this weekend. I know some of the men on that contract. They're not gentle. Victor's stomach turns cold. He thinks of the little girl sharing crackers with her brother. Of the older woman fretting over someone named Della's cough. Of Grace, coatless, shivering, still checking on everyone but herself. 11 days until bulldozers arrive. Private security arriving even sooner with instructions that won't be kind. Victor sits back, mind racing through every resource, every connection, every piece of leverage he's built over 15 years of careful, ruthless business. For the first time in longer than he can remember, none of it feels like enough. Because the woman who gave away her only coat to a stranger is about to lose the only shelter she has left. And the man responsible is someone Victor Kane has shaken hands with, someone he almost went into business with, someone who has no idea Victor now knows exactly what he's planning. Victor picks up his phone. Marcus, he says, voice hardening into something dangerous. Cancel my schedule for the next 2 weeks. I need everything you can get me on Desmond Halloran, and I need it faster than you've ever moved before. He doesn't yet know that stopping Halloran is going to mean confronting a man who's spent years perfecting the art of hiding cruelty behind a boardroom smile. Or that Grace's own painful history with sacrifice is about to explain exactly why she'd rather die protecting strangers than ask anyone for help. Grace Whitfield used to believe kindness always came back around. She grew up in a small house outside Dayton, raised by a single mother who worked nights at a diner and still somehow found the energy to volunteer at the church food pantry every Sunday morning. We don't have much, her mother used to say, ladling soup into bowls for people who had even less. But what we have we share. That's not charity, Gracie. That's just being human. Grace carried that lesson straight into nursing school, then straight into 6 years at St. Agnes Memorial, where she became known for staying late with frightened patients, for remembering birthdays, for the kind of care that shows up in small, unglamorous moments nobody else notices. 18 months ago, a man named Thomas Reyes was wheeled into her ER alone, no insurance card, no emergency contact, a ruptured appendix that had gone untreated for 2 days because he couldn't afford to be seen. Grace stayed past the end of her shift that night, holding his hand through the fear on his face while doctors prepped him for surgery. "I don't have anyone," he'd whispered, voice shaking, eyes wet with a fear that had nothing to do with the surgery itself. "Nobody's coming, miss. Nobody's coming for me." "I'm here," Grace told him, gripping his hand tighter. "You're not alone. Not tonight." He survived the surgery. But the bill that followed, $94,000, no insurance to soften it, would have crushed him completely. Grace remembers the exact moment she decided to help. Standing outside his hospital room 3 days later, listening to him quietly crying on the phone with a collections agency, voice hollow with a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being failed by every system meant to protect you. She didn't think about herself. She just thought about her mother ladling soup into bowls, saying, "That's not charity, Gracie, that's just being human." She liquidated her retirement account first. Then sold her car, taking the bus to work for months afterward. Then, when it still wasn't enough, she took a second mortgage on the small house she'd worked 8 years to afford. "You don't have to do this," Thomas told her, disbelief and gratitude warring across his face when she handed him the paperwork showing the balance cleared. "Nobody does this for a stranger." "You needed someone," Grace said simply. "I could be that someone." That's all it was. She never told anyone at the hospital what she'd done. Never asked for recognition, never expected repayment. 3 months later, the second mortgage payments she could no longer afford caught up with her. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday. She remembers because it was raining and she stood in her driveway reading it 3 times before the words actually made sense. She lost the house within 6 weeks. Without an address, her nursing license, requiring continuing education fees and renewal costs she could no longer manage, lapsed within the year. "I don't regret it," she tells the older woman in the garage sometimes late at night, when the conversation drifts toward the life she used to have. "Not the choice. Just, I didn't expect it to cost quite this much." "You could have saved yourself and just walked away," the older woman said once, not unkindly, just honestly. "Most people would have." "Most people didn't watch him cry on that phone," Grace answered quietly. "I did." That's the thing nobody understands about Grace Whitfield's kindness. It was never performance. It was never calculated. It was the same instinct that had her giving away her only coat to a stranger on 8th Street. Not because she expected anything back, but because she genuinely couldn't watch someone suffer when she had the power to ease it, even a little, even at cost to herself. The community in the parking garage formed slowly around her, almost without her realizing it was happening. A woman named Della, fleeing an abusive marriage with nothing but a duffel bag. A mother named Priscilla with 2 small children, evicted after her husband's construction job dried up. An elderly man named Walter who'd simply outlived his savings and his family both. Grace became the person who remembered everyone's names, who tracked who needed medicine, who negotiated with the corner store owner for expired but edible bread, who sat up nights with feverish children when their mothers were too exhausted to stay awake themselves. "She's the reason half of us are still alive," Della told Victor's security contact quietly, unaware she was even being asked, when Marcus's team discreetly gathered information about the community for Victor. "She gave up everything she had for a stranger once. She's been giving up pieces of herself for the rest of us ever since." Victor reads that line in Marcus's report and has to set the folder down, jaw tight, something raw and unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He thinks of his own history. The empire he built on the cold, hard belief that vulnerability gets you used, that generosity is just weakness other people learn to exploit. Grace Whitfield has been living proof of the opposite for 18 months straight, and it's cost her everything material she once had. He thinks of Desmond Halloran's demolition notice. Of private security arriving this weekend with instructions that won't be gentle. He thinks of Della's cough getting worse in the wet. Of 2 small children sharing crackers because it's all there is. He thinks of Grace, coatless in 22-degree wind, still checking on everyone but herself. Victor stands from his desk, moving to the window, looking out over a city that walks past people like Grace every single day without ever slowing down to notice what they're carrying. He spent 15 years believing his power exists to protect his own interests, his own empire, his own carefully guarded world. For the first time, he's starting to understand what that power could actually be used for instead, and exactly how much is about to be lost if he doesn't move fast enough to stop it. He picks up his phone and dials Marcus. "Get me a meeting with Halloran," he says. "Today. Tell him it's about the Riverside project. Don't mention the garage." He doesn't yet know that Halloran has already accelerated the timeline, and that the private security arriving this weekend isn't planning to wait politely for anyone to leave. The call comes at 6 a.m., 2 days earlier than Victor expected. Marcus' voice sharp with urgency. "Boss, Halloran moved up the schedule. Security's at the garage right now. They're not being patient." Victor is already pulling on his coat before Marcus finishes the sentence. "How many?" "6 men. And boss, they're not corporate rent-a-cops. I recognize 2 of them. They've done worse work than eviction notices before." Victor's stomach drops. "Get everyone you can. Now." At the garage, chaos has already erupted. A man in a black jacket kicks over a cardboard partition, sending Priscilla's makeshift shelter collapsing in a heap of blankets and scattered belongings. "Everybody out. Now," he shouts, voice booming off the concrete walls. "This property's condemned. You've got 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Della's voice cracks with panic, scrambling to gather her duffel bag. "It's 20 degrees outside, where are we supposed to?" "Not my problem," the man snaps, shoving another shelter aside with his boot. Priscilla's daughter, the little girl who shared crackers 2 nights ago, starts crying, clinging to her mother's leg as the man's shadow falls across them. "Mama, is he gonna hurt us?" "No, baby, stay behind me." Grace comes running from the far corner where she'd been checking on Walter, breath catching hard in her chest at the sight unfolding. "Stop," she shouts, sprinting toward the man now looming over Priscilla and her daughter. "Stop, please, they have nowhere to go." "Lady, I don't make the rules." The man barely glances at her. "Property's condemned. Everybody's out today. You can't just throw families into the street in this cold." Grace's voice shakes with fury now, positioning herself between the man and the terrified little girl. "There are children here. Then their mother should have found somewhere better to raise them," the man sneers, reaching past Grace to grab Priscilla's arm. Grace doesn't think. She grabs his wrist, twisting hard enough to break his grip. "Don't touch her." The man's face darkens, shoving Grace backward hard enough that she stumbles, catching herself against a concrete pillar, pain flaring sharp through her shoulder. "Grace!" Della screams. Walter, 73 years old and barely steady on his feet, moves to help her up, only for a second security guard to shove him roughly aside. "Old man, back off." "Hey!" Victor's voice cuts through the chaos like a blade, echoing off every concrete surface in the garage. He strides in fast, coat flying open, 3 of his own men fanning out behind him, and the temperature of the entire standoff shifts instantly. The security team freezes. Because 2 of them recognize exactly who just walked in, and exactly what kind of trouble that recognition means. "Get away from her," Victor says, voice low, lethal, already crossing the distance toward the man still gripping Grace's arm. "This isn't your property, pal," the man starts, though his confidence is visibly cracking. Victor's hand closes around his wrist, twisting hard, forcing him to release Grace with a sharp cry of pain. "It's about to be," Victor says. "Every single one of you needs to leave. Right now. Halloran sent us to clear this lot." "Halloran," Victor says, voice dropping colder still, "is about to have a very different conversation with me than the one he thinks he's having. This eviction stops. Now." The men hesitate, glancing at each other, calculating whether Victor Kane's reputation is worth testing. It isn't. They know it isn't. Slowly, reluctantly, they back away, retreating toward the fence gap, muttering into radios as they go. Victor turns immediately to Grace, kneeling beside her, voice softening completely. "Are you hurt?" Grace stares at him, recognition dawning slow and disbelieving. "You're the man from across the street. The one who followed me." "I followed you 3 nights ago," Victor admits, no hesitation in it. "I've been trying to figure out how to help ever since." "Help?" Grace's voice cracks, equal parts exhaustion and fury, pulling herself upright despite the pain in her shoulder. This is what your kind of help looks like. Men storming in here to threaten children. That wasn't me, Victor says firmly. That was Desmond Halloran. And I intend to make sure he never comes near this place again. Priscilla's daughter is still crying, clinging to her mother, and Grace immediately crosses to kneel in front of her despite her own pain, voice gentling instantly. You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe. I promise. I promise. The girl's sobs slow gradually as Grace holds her close. Della helps Walter to his feet, checking him over with visible worry. You okay, old man? Bruised pride more than anything, Walter mutters, though his hands are shaking. Victor watches the whole scene, the community rallying instantly around each other, checking wounds, comforting children, the practiced rhythm of people who've had to protect each other before. His jaw tightens with fresh resolve. This isn't ending here, he says loud enough for the whole garage to hear. I promise you that. Grace looks up at him, exhaustion and wariness warring in her expression. Why do you even care? You don't know any of us. I know you gave a stranger your only coat in 20-degree weather, Victor says quietly. I know you liquidated everything you own to save a man's life 18 months ago. I know you've spent every night since making sure a dozen strangers stay alive with almost nothing to your name. Grace's breath catches. How do you know all of that? Because after I watched you give away your coat, Victor says, I couldn't stop trying to understand who you were. And what I found made it impossible to walk away. His phone buzzes violently. He glances at it, jaw tightening further. Halloran's demolition crew, he says grimly. They're pushing the timeline up again. Bulldozers arrive in 6 hours instead of 11 days. Grace's face goes pale. 6 hours? Where are we supposed to take everyone in 6 hours in this cold with children? You're not taking them anywhere, Victor says, already dialing, voice hardening back into command. I am. But first, I need to make sure Desmond Halloran understands exactly what happens when he threatens people I've decided to protect. He looks around at the garage, at Priscilla still comforting her daughter, at Della checking Walter's bruised elbow, at Grace standing protectively in front of all of them despite her own pain. Give me 6 hours, Victor says. I promise you nobody in this garage is losing their home today. Not while I'm breathing. He doesn't yet know that confronting Desmond Halloran is about to force a reckoning neither man expected, or that Grace, watching him walk back out toward the fence gap, is about to discover exactly how far Victor Kane is willing to go to protect people he met only days ago. Desmond Halloran's office occupies the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the river, all clean lines and expensive art, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small. He's mid-sentence with his assistant when Victor Kane walks in unannounced, security team parting around him without a fight. Victor. Halloran's smile is smooth, practiced, betraying nothing. This is a surprise. My assistant said something about the Riverside project. I lied, Victor says flatly, closing the office door behind him. This is about a parking garage on 9th and Lincoln. Halloran's smile doesn't waver, but something flickers behind his eyes, the first crack in the composure. I don't know what you're talking about. You sent 6 men to threaten a community of homeless women and children this morning, Victor says, crossing the room slowly, voice dangerously calm. One of them shoved a woman hard enough to bruise her shoulder. Another knocked down a 73-year-old man. That property is condemned, Victor. Whatever squatters have taken up residence there have no legal. They have a right to not be terrorized by hired muscle while you quietly triple your investment on land you bought through 3 shell companies. Victor cuts in, voice hardening. Halloran's jaw tightens now, mask slipping further. You've been digging. I have. And what I found is going to be very uncomfortable for you if it reaches the city council before your rezoning approval clears. Halloran's composure finally cracks, leaning forward, hands flat on his desk. You think threatening my business is going to change anything? That property is mine, Victor. Legally, completely mine. Then sell it to me, Victor says simply. The room goes quiet. What? Sell me the property. Today. At triple what you paid for it, which, coincidentally, is exactly what you'd have made off the rezoning anyway, minus the demolition costs and the legal exposure of 6 armed men assaulting an elderly man on camera this morning. Camera. Halloran's face pales slightly. Victor pulls out his phone, turning it to show grainy but unmistakable security footage. One of Marcus's men had been recording from across the street the entire confrontation. Halloran's men shoving Grace, knocking Walter to the ground. A little girl crying, visibly terrified, in full view of the camera. This goes to every local news station in the city within the hour if we don't have a deal signed by noon, Victor says. Along with the Shell Company paper trail showing exactly how you structured this acquisition to avoid scrutiny. Halloran's hands curl into fists on the desk, breathing hard, calculating odds that are visibly collapsing in real time. You tank your own reputation just as badly going after me publicly, he says, a last desperate grasp at leverage. People will ask why Victor Kane cares so much about a homeless encampment. Let them ask, Victor says, voice steady, unflinching. I've spent 15 years building a reputation people fear. I don't mind if this is the thing that finally makes them respected instead. Halloran stares at him for a long moment, the calculation finally settling into resignation. Triple, he says quietly. And the Shell Company records disappear. The property transfers to a trust today, Victor counters. The trust protects everyone currently living there permanently. And the records disappear only after the ink is dry, and I've confirmed it myself. Halloran's jaw clenches, but he nods once, sharp, defeated. Fine. Have your lawyers send the paperwork. Victor is already turning toward the door. They're outside. We're doing this now. 3 hours later, Victor stands at the fence gap outside the parking garage, paperwork signed, property legally secured, the demolition crew long since called off and gone. Grace approaches cautiously, Priscilla's daughter peeking out from behind her legs, still wary from the morning's chaos. It's done, Victor says simply. This property belongs to a trust now. Nobody can touch it. Nobody can threaten anyone here again. Grace's breath catches, disbelief warring with exhaustion on her face. You bought it? You just bought the whole property. I bought it and I'm having it renovated, Victor says. Real walls. Real heat. Real plumbing. It won't happen overnight, but nobody sleeps here in the cold again. Grace's knees weaken slightly. She reaches for the concrete pillar beside her, steadying herself, overwhelmed. Why, she whispers. Why would you do all of this for people you've known for 3 days? Victor's expression softens, something raw finally breaking through 15 years of guarded control. Because I watched you give away the only thing keeping you warm to a stranger who needed it more, he says quietly. Because you gave up your entire life to save a man you just met. Because you've been holding this community together with nothing but sheer will for 18 months, and nobody ever thought to ask what it cost you. Grace's eyes fill, tears finally spilling over after a morning of holding everything together for everyone else. I didn't do it for anything in return, she says, voice cracking. I know, Victor says. That's exactly why you deserve it now. Priscilla's daughter tugs on Grace's sleeve, small voice hopeful. Miss Grace, does this mean we get to stay? For real? Forever. Grace kneels, pulling the little girl into a fierce hug, voice thick with emotion. For real, baby. Forever. Around them, the community begins to understand what's happened. Della gasping, hand pressed to her mouth, Walter sitting down hard on an overturned crate, overwhelmed, tears sliding freely down weathered cheeks. We're not losing this place, Della breathes. We're really not losing it. You're never losing it, Victor confirms. Not to Halloran. Not to anyone. Grace stands slowly, looking at Victor with an expression that's shifted from wariness into something far more complicated. Gratitude, disbelief, and the faint, cautious beginning of trust. You're not what I expected, she admits quietly. When I saw you following me that night, I thought. You thought I was dangerous, Victor finishes. You weren't wrong. I am. Just not to people like you. For the first time since Victor arrived in her world 3 days ago, Grace lets herself smile. Small, exhausted, but genuine. Thank you, she says. For seeing us. Really seeing us. You saw everyone else first, Victor says. I just followed your example. Around them, the garage that nearly became rubble this morning now hums with disbelieving relief. A community exhaling together after 18 months of holding its breath. But Victor knows this is only the beginning of what needs rebuilding. For the community, and for the woman who gave everything she had to keep it alive. 6 weeks later, the garage is unrecognizable. Real walls divide real rooms now, insulated against the cold that once seeped through every cracked concrete surface. A working kitchen occupies what used to be the ground level, warm light spilling from windows that didn't exist a month ago. Grace stands in the doorway of a small apartment. Hers now, permanently, the deed held in a trust that legally protects it from ever being threatened again. It still doesn't feel real, she admits, running her hand along a windowsill that actually keeps the cold out. Get used to it, Victor says from the doorway, a faint smile tugging at his usually guarded expression. It's not going anywhere. Down the hall, Priscilla's daughter races past in new sneakers, laughing, her brother close behind, both of them chasing a ball down a corridor that used to be cracked concrete and shadow. They laugh so much now, Grace says softly, watching them go. I forgot what that sounded like, honestly. It's been a long time since laughing was easy for any of us here. It's easy now, Victor says. That's the whole point. Della has moved into her own small unit 2 doors down, finally sleeping through full nights without the fear of a partner finding her. Walter tends a small garden box on the building's new rooftop terrace, insisting the tomatoes will be ready by August. Grace herself starts nursing school again in the fall. Full tuition covered quietly, anonymously, through a scholarship fund Victor established that never once mentions his name. I don't want people knowing where the money came from, he told the school administrator plainly. Let her believe she earned it. Because she did. Tonight, on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city skyline, Grace finds Victor sitting alone, tie loosened, staring out at lights he's looked at 1,000 times but seems to be seeing differently now. Can I sit? She asks. Always. She settles beside him, coat, a new one now, warm, unpatched, pulled snug against the evening chill. I got my acceptance letter today, she says quietly. Nursing program starts in September. I know, Victor admits. I may have checked. Grace laughs, soft and surprised. You checked on my acceptance letter? I wanted to know before you told me, he says, something almost sheepish in his expression, unfamiliar on a man usually so composed. I've gotten used to caring what happens to you. Turns out that includes wanting to know things early. Grace's cheeks warm and for a moment neither of them speaks, the city humming quietly below. You know, she says eventually, I spent 18 months believing kindness was something you gave away and never got back. That's just how it worked. You give, you lose, you keep giving anyway because the alternative is watching people suffer. And now I think maybe I just hadn't given it to the right person yet, Grace says, glancing over at him. Maybe it just took the right person finally deciding to give something back. Victor's jaw works slightly, emotion surfacing beneath careful control. I spent 15 years believing nobody gives anything away without an angle, he admits. You're the first person who ever proved me completely wrong. That's a lot of vulnerability for a man like you, Grace teases gently, echoing the wariness she once held toward him now softened into something warmer. I'm working on being someone worth that kind of trust, Victor says quietly. Every single day. He reaches over, hand finding hers on the low wall between them, tentative, careful, like he's still relearning how gentleness works. The old man you helped that first night, Victor says. Aldo. He still comes by sometimes. Says he owes his life to a woman he never even got the chance to thank properly. He doesn't owe me anything. That's exactly what makes you who you are, Victor says. And exactly why I'm never letting this place, or you, go unprotected again. Below them, the little girl's laughter drifts up from the courtyard, chasing her brother in the last of the evening light. Both of them warm, both of them safe, both of them home. Grace leans her head slightly against Victor's shoulder, watching the skyline, feeling something settle inside her that's been missing for longer than 18 months. Not just survival anymore. Something that feels, cautiously, impossibly, like the beginning of being cared for instead of always being the one who cares. 1 year later, the building on 9th and Lincoln has a name now, Whitfield House, chosen unanimously by the community despite Grace's embarrassed protests. The rooftop garden Walter started is thriving, tomatoes and peppers spilling over raised beds, a small plaque near the entrance reading simply, built on kindness that asked for nothing back. Grace walks the halls most mornings now in scrubs again, finishing her final semester of nursing school, volunteering evenings at a downtown clinic that serves the same population she once lived among. Miss Grace, can you check my arm? I fell off my bike, A boy from the third floor asks, holding out a scraped elbow with total trust. Let's see, Grace says, kneeling automatically, gentle hands doing what they've always done best. You're going to be just fine, sweetheart. Priscilla now manages the building's small community kitchen, cooking dinner most nights for whoever wants company, the smell of something warm and homemade filling the halls the way it never could in the garage. Della finished her associate's degree in social work last spring, now helping other women navigate exactly the kind of danger she once escaped alone. Walter's tomatoes, true to his promise, came in heavy and sweet by late August, shared freely among every unit in the building, exactly the way Grace once shared crackers on a concrete floor. Desmond Halloran, quietly and without fanfare, sold off the remainder of his questionable property holdings after word of the confrontation spread through certain circles. Not publicly humiliated but never quite trusted the same way again. Victor's own organization has shifted too, slowly, deliberately. A foundation established under Grace's guidance, funding permanent housing conversions for 3 more abandoned properties across the city, each one protected the same way Whitfield House was protected first. Tonight, on the same rooftop where trust first quietly took root, Victor finds Grace watering Walter's garden boxes in the fading evening light. I have something for you, he says. Grace turns, brushing dirt from her hands, curious. Another scholarship fund I'm not supposed to know about? Different this time. Victor holds out a small box. Inside, not jewelry but a set of keys and beneath them a folded deed. The clinic 2 blocks from here, Victor explains. The one you volunteer at. It's struggling to stay open. I bought the building. It's yours to run permanently the moment you finish your license. Grace's hands pressed to her mouth, eyes brimming. You didn't have to. I know, Victor says softly. I wanted to. She looks up at him, something profound and searching in her expression. A year ago I had nothing but a patched coat and a concrete floor. Now you're handing me a clinic. A year ago, Victor says, you had everything that actually matters. I just finally learned to recognize it. He takes her hand, steadier now than he's ever been, and gets down on one knee. No grand speech. No audience beyond the tomato plants and the city lights below. I spent 15 years believing power was the only thing worth building, he says. You taught me that the only thing actually worth building is a life spent making sure other people are warm, fed, and safe. I don't want to just fund that anymore, Grace. I want to build it with you. For real. For good. Yes, Grace breathes, tears spilling freely now. Yes, Victor. Below them, through the open rooftop door, the sound of Priscilla's kitchen carries up. Laughter, clattering pots. A home built entirely out of what one exhausted woman refused to stop giving away. That's the thing about kindness, isn't it? It doesn't ask if you can afford it. It doesn't wait for the right circumstances or the safest moment. Grace Whitfield gave away her only coat on the coldest night of the year, not because she had anything to spare, but because she couldn't bear to watch someone else suffer when she had the power to ease it even a little. She spent 18 months believing that kind of generosity only ever flows one direction. Away from her, never back. She learned this year that real kindness has a way of finding its way home, even when you never expected repayment, even when you never asked for anything at all. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight. If you had almost nothing left, would you still find a way to give something away to someone who had even less? And if someone showed you that kind of selfless generosity even as a total stranger, would you have the courage to follow them, to see where it led, and to make sure it never went unanswered again? Tell me in the comments. Has a small act of kindness you witnessed ever changed how you see the world, even if it wasn't given to you directly?